If you're thinking about moving to Spain and you've got kids who are of school age, then you're going to be thinking about how your kids are going to cope in school. If you've been watching my content and you're enjoying it, don't forget to drop me a follow or hit subscribe. So putting your kids into a school in Spain is a big deal, especially if you're not from a Spanish speaking country and everything's new. Before we moved to Spain, this was one of the things that worried me the most, was how the kids were going to settle in. So would they be okay? Bearing in mind they didn't speak any Spanish at all. We didn't put them into classes before we moved to Spain, so they hadn't learned any of the language. We looked at lots of different types of schools. We looked at the international schools, we looked at the public schools here in Spain, or state schools, and we also considered concertadas. They're the three different types of schooling that you get in Spain. So your international schools, which are fully private, or your private Spanish schools, obviously paid. A lot of them cost a lot less than private schools in the UK, for example, and they have varying education systems that they work off. So British schools might work off a British curriculum, French schools from a French curriculum, etc. And there are lots, particularly if you're around Madrid or Barcelona, there's lots of different types of international schools that you can pick from. Then you've got concertadas, which are generally known as semi-private schools, quite often religious, not always, but quite often, and can be bi or trilingual depending on where they are. They can be really difficult to get into because the criteria is the same as a public or state school, and there's a point system based around that. And with the concertadas or semi-private schools, you do pay fees, but they're significantly less than the international or private schools. Then you've got the public or state schools, which are free to kids that are living in Spain, and you don't get to choose which one they go to. There's a point system, and points are allocated on various different things like catchment area, siblings that are already in the school, and lots of other things. And obviously this education is free. So when we started looking for schools for our kids were 5 when we moved here, and they'd been in a private school in the UK for a year and a term. So they'd done reception and they did 1 term of year 1. And then we moved to Spain and they started in the last year of infantil. So you've got 3 different levels of education in Spain. You've got infantil, which is from 3 to 6. And then you've got primaria, which is from 6 to 12. And then you've got ESO, or secundaria, which is from 12 to 16. And then after that you do bachillerato or other studies. So when we came here, our kids actually weren't in primary anymore. They almost went backwards because they'd already done a year and a bit of primary school in the UK. But actually I feel like that was probably the perfect time for them, because we wanted them to get to grips with the language, and that almost bought them a bit of time to be able to do that. Now, we did look at some international schools here and they were perfectly lovely, obviously fee paying. I'm sure they would have all been fine. But the feeling that we got from international schools was that, first of all, there was quite a lot of student turnover. The schools weren't really advertising this, but because people are coming and going, kids might be there for a year or 2, they might be there for longer. Spanish kids will probably be there for longer, but the international children who were there might only stay for a short period of time. So the feeling was that there would be quite a bit of turnover. And some of the British schools that we were looking at, whilst I'm sure all have excellent levels of languages and language teaching, it is primarily in English because they work off the British curriculum. And so all classes are in English, which is great in terms of maintaining that level of language and studies, etc. But actually, what we wanted for our kids was to be integrated straight away with the language and the culture. Now, because we were moving to Barcelona, to Catalonia, there was another added complication, and that's that of the language. So in Catalonia, the primary language of communication in schools is Catalan, not Spanish. So in infantil, up till the age of 6, everything's in Catalan. They do very little, in fact, if anything, in Spanish or Castellano. And so they needed to be able to learn 1 or 2 languages quickly. In the playground, most people speak Spanish, not Catalan, most of the kids. Because a lot of the families speak that at home. Now there are families who speak Catalan at home, of course, and so that comes into it as well. But for the infantil stage, we knew that there wouldn't be any teaching as such in Spanish. Now that they've gone into primaria, they have the majority of lessons in Catalan, they have some lessons in Castellano, and they actually have English lessons as well. Now obviously this is at a different level to what our kids would be being taught at home, because it's aimed at the Spanish kids who are here, who obviously have a lower level of English, and that's fine. So infantil is actually not obligatory schooling, so from 3 to 6 it's not obligatory, and of course you can go to private nurseries as well and pay for those, but actually it's free in public schools until the age of 6, so you don't have to go to a privately paid nursery. You can if you want to, and there are lots of international nurseries where the primary language might be English or another language, French, German, or you can go to a Spanish speaking public school where everything will be in either Spanish or the local language. If you're in the Basque Country, for example, it'll be in Euskera. In Valencia at the moment, it'll be in Valenciano or Catalan. And in Galicia, you've got Gallego as well. So we knew there was going to be an added language complication, but that's okay. And actually, they've picked it up in no time. We did have some problems last year, and everything's a learning curve, right? It doesn't matter where you're going, there's always going to be a bedding in transition period for any kids at any age. Because of the age that ours were at, I think that it was the perfect age for them to get to grips with the languages, Catalan and Spanish, before they started primary school at the age of 6. And we're very lucky that they got places in a state school close to us and went straight into that class and then moved straight into primaria the year after. Now obviously every child is different, and I've spoken to so many people about this subject, people who have actually moved to Spain and people who are thinking about it. The majority of people say that up to the age of the end of primary school, so 11, 12, it's relatively straightforward for kids to transition and pick up the language. Now obviously the older that kids get, the more difficult it's going to be. And particularly when they're in secondary school, the language barrier becomes more important from a social aspect, and also being able to understand what on earth is going on around them. Because if classes are being taught in a language that they don't understand, clearly it's going to be mentally challenging for them, on top of trying to make friends and socialise. So I found that a lot of people choose international schools for their kids if they're looking at secondary. Not all of them, and actually a lot of people have successfully integrated older kids into Spanish schools with no problem in secondary. Likewise, a lot of people who have put their kids into primary schools have picked international schools. And I think if you don't speak Spanish as a parent, it can be challenging as well. We haven't had any real language support from our school. Fortunately, I spoke Spanish before we got here. I don't know what that would have looked like if I didn't. They do have an English teacher who speaks English, but the teachers don't really speak English. That's what we chose, that's what we wanted. We wanted that total immersion from the very beginning for our kids. And that's been challenging on different levels. Communication with the school hasn't been as easy as it would be as if everybody spoke English. My Spanish is not perfect, and when you have problems that arise, it can be more difficult to deal with them. It can be more challenging, but that's what we wanted. And I completely understand if people who don't speak the language and are more nervous about those communications with the school will want to pick an English speaking school, for example, the one at a school that speaks their primary language and can communicate with them in that way. Some schools will offer the language support for kids. I've heard of schools that offer it on a 3-month basis to help the kids to integrate. So there are absolutely options, and I think when you're looking at different schools, that's something to consider. What kind of language support will you or your kids get, if any, when they're potentially joining that school, if they need it? So for us, after a year and 3 months of living in Spain, our kids are perfectly understanding and speaking Catalan and Spanish. My daughter in particular really struggled those first few months In fact, quite a few months, she wouldn't speak to her teacher at all. You could see though that she was just absorbing all of the information. She wanted to make sure that she knew what she was doing before she went for it. We also put them into, because you've got 3 months of holidays in the summer, we put them into language school over the summer so that they could really get up to speed on their Spanish. And when they went back to school in September, that was it. She was off. My son had less issues, he just went for it. And he's learning steadily at his own pace as well. So how do you get your kids into a school in Spain? Well, the international schools, it's quite easy. You pick the area where you want to go, you go and look at some schools, reach out to them, go and have a visit, spend a few days looking around schools, try and sort out some visits that you can do all in one go, maybe take the kids with you even so they can have a look at the environment. And they all have their own enrolment procedures. It's normally going to include paying a deposit of some sort and committing to that school place. They're probably going to want to see some forms of documentation, but actually it's a lot easier to secure school places if you're going to put your kids in an international school. If, however, you want to look at concertadas or public state schools, then the process is a little more complex and timing is absolutely paramount. You can go and look around the schools, but it's probably going to be at really specific times of the year, not too long before when you need to do the enrolment process. So maybe February time, in the run up to when the enrolment process is actually going to open and you're able to start applying. Let's say you've done a visit in February, you're going to need to start making your applications in March, ready for when schools start in September. So applications will normally go in around March time, and then you'll be getting the decision in the following months, ready to start school in September. So the term times throughout the year, they don't have half terms like they do in the UK. They have 3 separate terms which are not split up by half terms. So you've got early to mid-September, it's going to be around the 8th, 9th, something like that, up until around the 21st of December. And then they'll be off until after Los Reyes, which is the 6th of Jan, so they'll normally go back around the 7th or the 8th of January. And then they'll be off again until Easter time, but in reality it's going to be late March when they'll have a week off. And then they'll go back till late June, so maybe the 25th, 26th, something like that, and then they're off again till September. Now within that you're going to have a ton of public holidays. I think last count there was 16 in Catalonia. And then kids have the schools can pick their own dias libres as well, which is kind of like a training day, but it's not a training day, it's just staff days off. And I think they pick 2 or 3 throughout the year. Then you've got obviously all the national holidays, the local holidays to think about as well, and they'll often end up being long weekends, maybe in a Monday and a Tuesday off, or a Monday or something like that. It's often Mondays. And then in terms of school hours, this varies massively throughout the country. So I've heard of areas in the south where it's 9 till 2, we're 9 till 4:30, and some will break for lunch as well. So for example, ours is 9 till 12:30, and then they break for lunch till 3, and then they've got classes from 3 till 4:30. Now we're very lucky that they have a breakfast club, although we've never used it. They don't call it breakfast club, they call it it's like preschool childcare. And then you have menjador or comedor in Spanish, it's menjador in Catalan, which is lunchtime childcare essentially. So historically a lot of kids will have gone home for lunch between 12:30 and 3. Some still do, but not very many. Most of them actually stay these days, certainly in our school. And they have a whole load of different staff which look after the kids during that time. The teachers go off obviously to have their lunch, and there's the lunch staff who look after the kids from 12:30 till 3, so they'll have lunch, play games, do drawings, play outside, all that kind of stuff. They'll come back to their lesson from 3 till 4:30. Now, again at our school, we've got extrascolares, which is like after school clubs, lots of different things that you can choose from, which are awesome, like rollerblading, football, dance, rhythm gymnastics, basketball, art, scientists, robotics, lots of different things. And that will go on till 5:30, 6 o'clock. So obviously accommodating to parents who work, you can have full childcare from 8 till 6. Now in other parts of the country where it school hours might be 9 till 2 and they don't have a break for lunch and then come back to classes, a lot of them will still have options because it is understood that parents need to work. So the best thing to do is ask the schools that you're looking at is, do they have preschool, after school, lunchtime care? And obviously you pay for your school lunches and your lunchtime care separately. Ours is about €7-8 a day per child. So going back to how you get into these schools, let's have a look at the point system. All right, so the key things for the point system, particularly here in Barcelona, are catchment area, so your proximity to the school, whether you've got any siblings there already, and then they're also going to look at various things which you'll get additional points for. And these are things like if you're a single parent family, if you've got special needs, disabilities, or a low income as well. So they might take those factors into consideration when looking at a place for your kids in the school that you want to look at. So when you come to applying for the school places, you're going to need to give them specific things, specific documentation. So ID, like your passport or your Spanish ID, your NIE, your TA. You're going to need birth certificates. You're also going to need health records, vaccination records. So make sure that you get those from your doctor before you move to Spain. And depending on the age of your child, you might also need their educational history. Let's say if they've taken any exams already, you might need a certificate, maybe a report from the school. A lot of the international schools like to see reports from their previous school, and you might obviously need to get all of this translated as well. So last couple of things to think about: SEN and homeschooling. So homeschooling is actually not legal in Spain. School is compulsory from the age of 6, and some say it's a bit of a grey area, but legally it isn't allowed. I know of some families that do online schooling. Maybe they're an international family who've come here and their kids are part of an online international school community, but generally kids are expected to go to school from the age of 6 here and be present. Now, in terms of special educational needs, there is support in Spain, and it is something. Spain is a massively open country in terms of inclusion and diversity. So obviously special educational needs are something that's very, very important to them when considering those things. But each school in each region will be different, as it will be in any country. So if there are specific needs that you need to be thinking about, you need to have those conversations with the school directly, as you would anywhere, to get an understanding of what kind of support that you might get. So I've covered quite a lot here today on schools. It's a massive topic. It's something that really worried me before we moved to Spain because it's so important. And I completely get that if you're moving to a new country, you want to know and understand as much as you possibly can about that situation before you move. In addition to this, I've written up a guide on putting your kids into schools in Spain. And if you go to the link in my bio, you can click on the link and you'll be able to download it from there. This is a written guide which covers a lot of what I've spoken about today with some additional information as well. I hope that's been helpful for you. Any comments, drop them below. I'd love to hear any questions from you about our experiences, what we found in Spain, and any thoughts or other concerns or worries that you might have as well. And if you've enjoyed this content and you want to hear more, then hit follow, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends who you think might find it useful as well.